thank you so much to the organization for having us be a part of your webinar series, and obviously some very important topics. I know we're a little tired sometimes of hearing about, the COVID economy and safety plans, but information certainly extremely important. Many of you have probably seen some sessions and even webinars over the last several months that covered these topics, and we'll review some of the key aspects. But today, what we'd like to focus on is sharing best practices, understanding strategies, talking about the next steps of what you need to do to move the safety, operational, and people plans as hopefully we move out of this COVID economy and back to what hopefully is what we consider to be the normal, and businesses to be back where they were, 6+ months ago. So we know we have a nice group here of some different types of backgrounds and a lot of member associations of the group. I know there'll be a couple more folks joining shortly as well. We have some key points that we want to cover. Again, updating some of you and sharing some best practices around safety plans and operational risks that many organizations in the manufacturing and food processing space are challenged with right now. Certainly employees, managing them, communicating with them, dealing with them in the COVID economy are some very, very key topics. And a lot of that has changed even very recently with the states, including New Jersey, not supplying the same type of unemployment benefits that they were, during the heart of the pandemic. So to start at the core safety plan and operational issues, that's something that's obviously been discussed for quite a number of months now, as businesses have started to reopen, or in most cases, within your environments, your business is probably never closed or maybe closed for a very short period of time. Hopefully production has continued to be strong in most of your areas. Obviously in the food industry as a whole has done well, but obviously there's certain pockets that have done better than others. Again, many of you have probably had a safety plan in place from the beginning. Again, if you have not, of course, that's something that needs to be done. It needs to be documented. It needs to be published to your employees. There needs to be significant training that's being done. And for those of you that have done that, which is probably most of you, it's also very important that there continues to be many updates to that. Hopefully, even prior to COVID, there were either monthly or quarterly safety meetings, operational meetings that you're doing within your teams. Those definitely need to continue. If anything, need to happen more frequently. We're seeing that a lot of our manufacturing clients, we're trying to get groups together at least bi-weekly, but again, at a minimum monthly, to review updated safety procedures, cleaning procedures, sanitation procedures, because again, some of that is changing. Particularly as production increases, the need for stronger sanitization and cleaning becomes even more apparent. The use of machinery, the use of common spaces, and then obviously even the spacing component are all very critical topics that need to continue to be reminded to all of your employees. And in obviously all cases need to be monitored by your safety team, your executive team, your operational managers in your facilities. Need to continually look, for appropriate spacing, again, cleaning procedures that are done even during the workday. Most of you, if not all of you, probably have significant cleaning that's done, whether during the down shifts or a third shift or a smaller shift, if you're in a multi-shift facility. Those cleans definitely need to continue, if anything, be even more ramped up. Obviously in March, April, May, and even into June, obviously the virus was significantly impacting New Jersey people and businesses. The virus rate was very strong. Obviously did thankfully take a dip down in most cases over the summer, but the numbers are starting to increase. And I can tell you from a lot of our manufacturing clients, these last 4 weeks, the infections that we're seeing are starting to mirror the numbers, maybe not of March and April, but of May and June. And I think some of that is coming where people are getting a little more relaxed. We know in people's personal life, businesses are reopening, people are either traveling and doing more socialization, Obviously, we're all human and we can't be, bunkered down at home forever. But what that means, people are getting exposed more. They're then coming to work using common machinery, common spaces, and we are seeing infection rates go up. So this is not the time to stop with, the strong cleaning and sanitization that was done early on. You need to keep the same standards, if not in some cases increase that. A couple areas to keep in mind. Again, some of it's self-explanatory, but hopefully you're doing in terms of having appropriate signage of machine use. Obviously, one-way or multi-way signage in terms of where people are walking and congregating to make sure that, again, there's appropriate spacing. If at all possible, limit or actually let no visitors into your production facility. Again, I've seen that more relaxed over the last month or two, where again, cases went down and now people are coming in. Really, that should be very significantly limited. If you're not doing temperature screening or other health screening, I really recommend you do that. I'm finding a lot of businesses and our clients, again, are starting to slow down on those processes of saying they don't need to do daily temperature checks. There doesn't need to be any health screening. Those absolutely need to continue. If you've already purchased a temperature scanning equipment, you have it, just use it. I know some organizations are doing home screening. If you've chosen to do that, that's fine, but still ask to have a daily sign-in, whether, again, them monitoring, signing in with their temperature or stating that they have passed a health screen at home, and have them sign off on a document or the email, have it, secured somewhere, so that obviously protects you and your business from a compliance standpoint, but obviously also hopefully gives you accurate information on people that have any symptoms. We know, especially as production is continuing, hopefully in most of your cases to increase, the need for employees to be available and to come to work every day is very important. Again, this relaxation of, well, somebody has a higher temperature, somebody has certain symptoms, I'm going to let them work anyway. While in the short term, it sounds great to have, a full workforce in every day. Remember, one person that gets infected, that has any of the signs, that comes in and is exposed to any of your people, can go from one person not coming to work to 10, 20, or 50 people. While we all know these outbreaks were more common in March, April, and May, I have seen over the last 2 weeks a couple outbreaks where it involved, several people. In one case, about 20% of the manufacturer's, first shift production was impacted. So this isn't the time, to start relaxing some of the standards. It's to maintain them, and if not, even increase it. State quarantine issues, something that, again, is very important. Again, even though the New Jersey rates, for the most part, are down and hopefully stay at a reasonable period, people that are traveling, even personally, to states that have higher infection rates, you really should maintain a quarantine policy. I've seen that only in about 50 to 75% of clients and manufacturers that I know. And again, if I look at the infection rates of those that didn't have that policy, they had a much higher rate. So somebody that travels to Florida or South Carolina or any of the continuing states that have high infection rates, which were very popular vacation stops over the summer, but still in some cases people are taking time off in the fall and moving into the winter season as it gets colder here and they want to go to warmer weather places. You should, if you can, require them, once they visit any of those states, to not return to your workplace for 10, if not up to 14 days after they return. If you don't have that ability to do that because you're short-staffed or feel that it doesn't fit within your business model, you should absolutely require that they take a COVID test before they return. And, that you want to see a result of that COVID test. Again, our preference, and from what we've seen, the quarantine is a better plan, but it is a backup plan. Get a COVID test and then closely monitor those people's symptoms. Those people should absolutely also be monitored daily for the first 10 to 14 days after their return. Again, that's something that really needs to be maintained. Again, I hope that everybody, has mask wearing across, your production facilities. We know in some cases you're not able to have 6 feet or more distance. Of course, wherever that is possible, you certainly need to do that. Any employees that don't wear a mask or don't wear it properly, as we know properly, being properly fitted over their nose and their mouth, need to be written up just like you would for any performance issue. And whether you have a 3 strikes and out mentality or a multi-step warning process. If you're in a union environment, again, communicate with the union and make sure that they're comfortable with the process you put in place. But all of that needs to be monitored and documented, and continued violators obviously should be warned, fined, and/or terminated wherever appropriate. Again, all the hand sanitation, if there's plexiglass, if it makes sense in your business, in the production facility or in the office or administrative facility, anything you can to create that space and to control the potential infection rate. Those things all should certainly still be out there. Let's talk about people. I think that's an underrated area that not as many of us are focusing on. There has been, we know in some cases, employee shortages, whether that's people that did not return to the work environment or slowly returning or trying to work part-time. It has been challenging, we know, to get talent in certain areas. While some people think that creating these safety plans and all these procedures are a deterrent to getting talent, I think in many cases, actually, people want to see that and will make people more comfortable. When you're hiring new people or trying to get people return to work, I think you should share your safety plan. I think you should communicate with them the steps you're taking to protect them and obviously all the employees in the company. And when we've done that with new employees or returning employees in manufacturing environments, I think the reaction is mostly positive, and they're very appreciative of the steps that an organization is taking, not only protect the people and the company as a whole, but themselves and their colleagues. So don't see that negative, see as a negative, please see it as a positive. And for every one person that maybe thinks it's something that doesn't make sense and is inhibiting their performance, I think there's going to be 9 out of 10 people are going to appreciate that. Cross-training is something that, again, we always talk about regardless of the COVID environment, but something that needs to make sure it needs to be done across as many positions as possible. There are people that are calling out sick. Hopefully there's not, too many COVID cases now in your environment, but when it happens, the need to cross-train is absolutely there. So if you haven't, done a formal cross-training process across applicable positions or common positions, this is definitely the time to do it. Make sure that you have appropriate backup, make sure that, people have the right skills and ability to handle those roles, but try to allocate some time, even over the next 30 or 60 days. We see a lot of business owners say that, well, there'll be a vaccine coming. This will only be for another month or two. While we all hope that's the case, certainly none of us know. Even if a vaccine were to come out, over the next few months, we know it might take several months or maybe even up to a year for everyone to get the vaccine. And then obviously you even have to make decisions. Are you requiring your employees to get the vaccine? And that's something that we're going to all need to monitor very closely, because one of the things that we've done is, have in some situations a health survey on those questions. And you can, as long as it's worded carefully, the questionnaire asks people if there's a vaccine available, are they interested in getting it? And the reason we're doing that is, as an employer, potentially be able to, give the vaccine through a third party. So that's something I would recommend asking to get a little bit of a feel for it. Please consult either, an employment professional, a qualified HR person that you have inside your organization. A group like my team that could do that. Is we need to make sure that we're respecting employees' rights and the questions as legally, but it is a reasonable question to ask if worded appropriately. Even ties into flu season and flu shots. A lot of companies, have flu shot clinics. This year they're becoming very popular. We highly recommend that you do a flu shot clinic. Again, you can't require it, but to definitely make sure that you push it, communicate it, and encourage people to the best of their ability to do that. Because even if somebody gets the common flu, they're going to have a lot of the potential symptoms of the coronavirus. And those people, could be out of work for a very significant period of time, maybe even longer than what they would in a common flu, because the symptoms will be there. They have to be able to get COVID testing. Well, thankfully, COVID testing is easier now. There's a possibility that it might get more difficult as we get into the full season, as people get the flu, as potentially COVID increases again, with people that are not monitoring their health and safety the way they were back some months ago. We need to plan for a lack of availability of testing, and again, for the flu to potentially inhibit people from being able, to work effectively. Some other employee communication strategies is make sure that your people, and you're required to, by the federal government, understand the components of the FFCRA, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which has been around since early April. Many of you might be familiar with it. It was something that you were mandated by the federal government to communicate and to post, in a public area inside your production facility and your place of business. Some people are very confused about the FFCRA, but it is a vehicle to be able to give people time off. Obviously, if they contract the virus, if they've been formerly exposed to the virus and need to quarantine as per doctor's orders, or another very common scenario, which is providing childcare services for children that aren't necessarily in school full time. While again, some employers have seen it as an impediment or concern to getting employees to come to work, for those people that are struggling with any of those situations now, children and school being the most popular one as we get into the fall, it does give you an ability to retain your workforce for folks that are most valuable to you. And even people that are not one of your top people, it still keeps them connected to the organization if they take any of the leave time. And all of the wages, as some of you might know, are reimbursed through the federal government program. So while you have to lay out the dollars for people that qualify, it will eventually be reimbursed for you through payroll tax credits. So it does limit the spend that you have, but you're required to communicate and to offer the FFCRA to all of your active employees. If you have employees that are on furlough, or of course employees that are terminated, you are not required to offer the FFCRA. And again, I see a lot of companies not necessarily handling it the right way or offering it to some people and not to others. That is not something you can do. It's the same type of employment discrimination you would have in any other scenario. So please manage that carefully. That's an area that if you have some concerns about, I'd like to talk to you offline and help you manage that more effectively. And in most cases, it's going to be a positive situation, for you and your organization. Again, labor and resource constraints are a very key topic. Flexible hours, I think right now are also very important to be able to securing the right labor. For those of you in a multi-shift environment, you'll hopefully have that flexibility of letting people work across shifts, moving shifts around as needed, giving maybe just a couple days a week that people want to work a certain, set of hours, and the other days, a different shift. If you have that ability to flex it, well, I know it makes scheduling difficult. It will give you a nice ability to retain employees. It's particularly, again, common this fall where people have children that are in school or maybe are in a hybrid situation where there'll be some days they need to be home at certain times and other days where they can be flexible. So that's something that we're seeing for companies that are offering that flexibility. And that even means to be moving to part-time employment. People might be working 5 days a week, now need to go to 3 days a week, but still fulfill certain roles for your organization that give you the labor and resources, that you need. We've talked a few times about the virus resurgence. Again, we're all hoping that does not happen, but as we've said, we're seeing signs over the last few weeks where there's a good chance that it will happen. Maybe not to the numbers, in March and April, but definitely up from where we were this summer. We think it's the time, again, to still managing your payroll, but to overhire to an extent. Start building, recruiting, groups of people and people ready to hire develop a temporary, or part-time strategy to bring more workers into play. We know, especially in a lot of your facilities, there needs to be training and appropriate transition done. Maybe it's time to start bringing in some temps or temp to perm workers to start shadowing and start going through training, have those people on call when needed. There are obviously in certain areas of the manufacturing sector, people that are looking for work. So this is a good time to secure talent instead of waiting until, later in the fall season or in the winter where we think talent will get a lot tighter. Again, there's a lot of stories about unemployment, but unemployment, especially in the state of New Jersey, is starting to go down, and that's why. There's also people, for different reasons are starting to move out of state, and that's happened a lot, obviously, during, the time of the virus. There's also people moving from metropolitan areas, depending on where in New Jersey you are, people from, metropolitan Philadelphia or metropolitan New York, they're starting to come into New Jersey. So the labor force, again, is increasing to some extent as people move out of cities into more suburban areas, which, again, increases the amount of workers that could be available, in your state. So that's something to kind of obviously keep an eye out. One of the other strategies to kind of keep in mind, I know there were employee cuts, obviously potentially payroll cuts that, might have happened in your environment earlier in the pandemic. I think this is a time wherever possible to start restoring salaries, maybe even consider giving increases depending on when your normal compensation increase period would happen. And if you put that, you stalled that, in a lot of cases it's done mid-year, maybe now it's a time to reinstitute that. As we know, the cost of replacing talent often can be much, much higher than giving an extra $1 to an hour to the existing employees you have that are trained and their capability level. So if, again, you have people on furlough and you have those business needs, start bringing them back, even if it's on a part-time basis. Again, with, the additional unemployment now going down and in most cases dissipating, people do want to come back to work. And this is true even for the FFCRA and, more importantly, for the PPP loan, which I assume most, if not all of you have. Any people that you had on furlough or you terminated that you want to bring back, please make sure any communication with them on returning is in writing. You're going to need that, particularly for the PPP loan process. If any of you are having, FTE count issues, which if you've done some furloughs and terminations, you probably are. And as a reminder for folks that, were offered employment and decided not to return, it does not count as a headcount reduction in your PPP forgiveness process. So something very, very important that you need, and obviously even just helps you with your workforce and the available talent that you have. A couple other factors. Again, we talked about safety plans before. If you've published a safety plan, which we hope you have, you're continuing to update everything, you're doing everything right. One of the areas I've seen some organizations not do well is having a compliance document that people are signing off that they read and understand and are continuing to be updated on safety procedures. Well, you think that's self-explanatory, and it basically is. Again, if somebody has an infection and potentially files litigation against you, it's really important to have that extra step. Just like you'd have a signed employment letter, just like you'd, in some cases, have an employment agreement. We really think it's important to have that. And we have seen some cases of litigation already. The viability of that is obviously still in question. But as we all know, we don't necessarily want to completely rely on the court system to make the right decision. Hopefully they will. But again, I just think that extra step is something, that makes sense and very important to do. Many of us that had employees who had the virus, earlier in the COVID economy, had a lot of good steps in terms of somebody getting the virus, closing facilities, doing industrial cleans, and having reopening plans. I think we need to get back into that mode a little bit again. But if there's an outcry of the virus, in your facility. If you have, one or a very small group of people that get the virus through the resurgence, we don't necessarily recommend closing your facility, but obviously try to do some type of contact tracing protocol or program Again, if you're able to do that on your own, that's great. If you need an outside provider, we recommend you bring an appropriate person in. It's something that my group does very frequently, and take anyone who's had significant exposure to an employee who has that virus and quarantine them for a minimum of 10 days, which is generally now the new CDC recommendation, potentially up to 14 days if you want to obviously be extra safe. But again, I've seen a relaxation on the contact tracing part of this, where one person gets the virus, they send them home, but then again, that exposure to the people that work closely with them is still there. This isn't the time, to stop that process, even if it does unfortunately impact your workforce short term. Again, 5 or 10 people is better than 50 or 100 people, receiving that virus. If there is a somewhat significant outbreak, we still think you should take the same procedures, close part of the production facility where it was affected, or obviously potentially up to all of it, and do an industrial clean, and take all the precautions to be able to reopen. Some of you, just to keep in mind from a financial standpoint, should talk and look more carefully at your insurance program that you have in terms of your corporate insurance and business insurance. Some of them have actually been covering those commercial cleans and reopening procedures. And those that are originally contesting it, you can speak further and work with your broker. I've seen a lot of companies get paid out on their insurances by, having some of the cleanings and reopening plans covered by their insurance provider. It was still cheaper in a lot of cases from having a more significant issue. So something else to kind of keep in mind from a financial standpoint. Again, aspects of the PPP loan and how it relates to that is also very important. If you're still in your 24-week period of the PPP loan, again, you want to make sure you don't have a complete facility shutdown, because again, that could potentially hurt your forgiveness process. If you do have that shutdown for a short or long-term period of time, please speak to your advisor, and how that affects your PPP loan. There still might be an opportunity to get that full forgiveness by stating the issue that was at hand by, having a major virus outbreak cause your facility not to be able to produce, for a period of time. And the last part on employee communications and obviously the resurgence is make sure it sounds simple. Talk to your employees, understand their issues, answer their questions, make sure they feel comfortable. If an employee wants to stay home because they think they've been infected, while again, not an ideal situation by having a lack of employees, sometimes it's better to be safe than to be sorry. If an employee refuses to come to work or doesn't have, a mandatory quarantine, obviously at that point, like anything else, you can make an employment decision. But, all the same protocols you would have in terminating an employee, of monitoring their performance, are all still out there. The EEOC and other agencies are watching how companies are handling terminations, handling performance management. So it's a time to still be very stringent in your processes and all of that. So again, I've seen employees kind of put their performance management processes on hold or delay them. You still should give people feedback. You still should do formal evaluations. You still should write people up, have performance improvement plans where needed. Take all those steps that you would in running your business, because, it's people are watching, and there is litigation that is starting to come out of the COVID environment. So there's a lot of information that we shared, and I know there's some questions, that have been popping up, and I want to be able to answer some of those questions now that people have, asked, during the first part of the presentation, and then we can cover, a couple other topics as well. So let's get to one of the first questions. So we have a couple questions here about employees that were on furlough or on leave that, again, are refusing to come back, on a full-time, or in some cases even a part-time, situation. These are great questions. And again, while we covered that before, it not only affects your business, but the PPP loan. If an employee refuses to come back, again, it's very simple of putting together communication, ideally an email and or a formal letter that's sent obviously via email or via regular mail, and stating that they have a certain date that they can return. Generally, I wouldn't recommend more than 5 days where they need to return to the workplace, or else their job will no longer be held for them. I've seen some scenarios where people have had to return from furlough even back over the spring or summer, and then came back, a month or two later and said, well, now I want to return to work, and the company no longer had an appropriate position. And you, at that point, as long as you have it in writing, are no longer obligated to do that. Again, where you have an ability to let somebody work part-time or flex time, and it works within your production environment, do it, especially if the employee, is a high producer and, it's something that makes sense for them and of course for you. So I know that was a couple questions that people asked. I know Jessica's trying to gather a couple more, and, as you guys think of more questions, we'll answer a couple more of them. A couple other items that have come up, especially from a best practice standpoint, that I'd like to share with you. On your pre-screening and temperature scanning and process that you have in place, I would definitely make sure that you produce and put a list together of what the symptoms are of COVID and or some of the signs where it takes place. Have a minimum temperature of having somebody no more than 100.4, which is the CDC recommendation. Anyone who was over that, you need to send them home immediately. Obviously, monitor their systems and ask them to get a COVID test. And if they show symptoms, you can, as an employer, ask them to get a COVID test and require that they have a negative test before they return, and that you obviously want to see proof of that as well. Be careful, though, about asking other questions that obviously go against HIPAA or any other rules that are out there, especially even in the state of New Jersey, which we know is a very employee-friendly state. But if they have signs or have any symptoms of COVID, you can require a test and to see that test result before you have them, return to work. So something that's very important. Again, I have here a question about social distancing. Again, on a production facility, they're having a lot of challenges or difficulties keeping people 6 feet apart. But then I guess there's some issues about mask wearing. Again, we know it's not always possible to keep 6 feet apart, but either whether you are or not, it's very, very critical that people wear masks, even if they're 12 or more feet apart. And we know it's not always comfortable. If possible, and I think many of you probably have, to provide masks to the employees, potentially breathable masks, cloth or other breathable masks where they can, be in an 8-hour-a-day environment and have them on, during their break or lunch hours. Certainly they can take them off as long as they have appropriate spacing. I would encourage people to go outside, take some fresh air. Lunch is also, and break times has been a challenging area. I know many of you still want to have lunch rooms or facilities. You can have them if possible, as long as the weather's still nice. I would encourage people to have lunch outside. But again, if you have a break room, try to keep people 6 feet apart. I know they can't wear masks when they're eating or drinking. So try to make sure there's that appropriate spacing in that environment, especially since, people will not have, necessarily all their protective PPE available. Okay. So Jess, do we have any more questions that are coming through?
I don't see any more, Jeff.
Okay. Well, again, a couple closing thoughts that I have, and if over the next minute or two, if there's any more questions, happy to answer them here on the webinar, or obviously, the association will provide our contact information, and always happy to talk to you about one-on-one, and any open issues you have and any assistance that we or any of our colleagues can provide. A couple closing thoughts. Obviously, make sure that one, you continue to be very vigilant, over the next several months until obviously there is, a process to be able, to of course get, the proper testing and for there to be a vaccination for COVID, which of course at that point, hopefully most, if not all of your employees will take. Make sure your safety plans and safety meetings are done on a very consistent basis, as we shared. Make sure there's an ability for employees to communicate any concerns they have, to their managers or, to your executive team. Very often we see some people that report violations and they're not taken seriously. Make sure they are. Tell your employees that any violations will be handled. Show them by those actions that you're taking care of them. And obviously one, it's protecting you and your organization, but obviously it's giving them comfort that they are able to come to work and make sure that, they stay healthy and will continue to work for you. We have seen that turnover where some manufacturers are not taking these safety procedures seriously, and people are leaving because of that. And then obviously giving them even a bigger talent issue. We covered a lot of issues around unemployment and furloughs. One other area that's also from a financial standpoint to protect you. If people are not returning from furlough or even have been terminated, especially terminated voluntarily where they decided they weren't going to come back to work, please make sure you continue to monitor the unemployment process, contest your unemployment. Obviously, you're paying into that in the state of New Jersey. And if people are wrongfully filing for unemployment, as we know, if they leave a job voluntarily, they're not eligible for unemployment, you should contest it so that, you're not necessarily having to pay into their share. Again, unemployment, thankfully, is going down now because of jobs becoming available and the lack of additional funding from the federal government, but it's still an issue, and I'm still seeing a lot of employers paying into the fund, much more than they should. And again, performance management is so key right now. Monitor, document, and make sure you understand everything that's going on in your environment so that you're protected now. And obviously, once we get out of the COVID economy, I'm available, as I said, to share any more best practices. Look at your individual situation, develop safety, employee communications plans, performance management processes, or whether it's training your HR people that you have, or obviously working directly with the executive management and ownership. We're doing that with many manufacturers across New Jersey and the tri-state area, and we're happy to speak to any of you in more depth. So Jess, I thank you, for you and your organization's time, and hopefully I'll get to speak to everybody very soon.